one of the things that historians and people who are looking at ancient manuscripts look for is whether things are put in to embellish or to add or to spin the story they're trying to tell. So usually they exaggerate or they pull in some outlandishly important characters and so on. But the story of Jesus is not like that. It is quite unusual. And Luke is the gospel writer who says at the beginning of his two-part book, Luke and Acts, he said he's going to look into the evidence of all that he has heard to make sure that this story is true for Theophilus, who he's writing the gospel and the book of Acts for. And Theophilus is kind of a figurative name, meaning lover of God. And Luke begins and ends his gospel with sets of witnesses to very important events that would not have been seen as credible in their time. So you've got the women are the first witnesses to the resurrection. And in those days, as you all know, a woman's testimony was not taken very seriously. And things have changed, thank goodness for that. But in those days, it wasn't. And at the Christmas story, the first witnesses we have in Luke's gospel are these shepherds. And they were really outcast, and they were marginal to society, and they were kept away, and they were smelly, and they were often not welcomed into polite company. It's difficult to think of a equivalent today, but probably for some of us in years gone by, it might be people of the travelling community, or tinkers and so on, as we used to call them, which horribly were kind of marginalised within British society and seen with suspicion. And so the shepherds, choosing them as witnesses, nobody would have deliberately done that unless this is actually what happened. It makes no sense having shepherds as the first witnesses if you're trying to really promote a story in those days. So this has, for historians and for textual critics, this gives the nativity story a ring of truth, that it sees people who are on the edge and seen as not very important, who are given center stage. And that happens again and again all the way through the Gospels, and it ends obviously with the resurrection appearances and the women as the main witnesses to that. And I find that encouraging, because one of the things that we find today is that it seems to be that governments and people in authority are really struggling, whether it's in the church or in politics or in economics or in whatever. They're struggling to find a way forward. They're struggling to find answers to the problems and the great challenges facing us, even within the UK. And yet, if you look at history, over the long haul, what you find, and this is particularly true for the church, but other parts of society as well, is that when things get stuck in a society or a church or whatever, renewal and revival and reform often come from the edge. They often come from the margins. It's people who were not taken very seriously. It's those groups that begin to have fresh ideas and fresh energy and sometimes a fresh vision of what society can be like. And it's from the margins, history shows again and again, that new things come and a new beginning comes. And I find that very heartening, because the Christmas story is all about people on the margins of the Roman Empire, and even within the state of Israel, in a wee stable and a manger there. It did occur to me, as I was thinking about this story, that again is one of these wee added bits of information that only Luke mentioned, that the baby was, she laid him in a manger. It's just one verse, and it's just in passing. And yet so much has been made of that over the years since then. Just this wee one kind of, it's almost like a throwaway line, that the baby was laid in a manger. And there's no mention of a stable, there's no mention of anything else, but just because there was no room, baby was laid in the manger. And it's possible that lots of folk couldn't find accommodation there because it was this big census, so lots of people were coming back. And Bethlehem in those days was not a very big place, so it was overflowing. So it's possible that rather than just being in a wee room on their own, not in a wee stable, there was actually other people there, all crowded in. Who knows? And this manger was just a convenient place to lay the bairn because there wasn't any wee cot to put him in. And there's these wee kind of drops of history that speak to stress and muddle and strain and just lack of the way you would like things to be. Think of all these folk who are stuck at airports at the moment trying to get home. We've got Sarah Starbeck's son Alistair. I'm not sure if Sarah's on Zoom or not, but he's finally arrived back from Colorado. They're picking him up in Edinburgh this afternoon on the way to Haddington. But he was supposed to come yesterday. But it was a real touch and go, would he make it or not? And the birth of Jesus into that kind of domestic chaos and put in a manger, there's a ring of authenticity about that. Luke's not trying to make a big deal of it. I don't think he is. He's just trying to say that's what happened. It was the shepherds who saw him. He was put in a manger because there was no room. And I think for us, our lives, our situations are often not what we would like them to be. They're not as we would have hoped. But I was reading a wonderful quote yesterday that solace, the word solace, is where we go with our hopes that have been disappointed and find them refashioned into a new kind of hope. That we find solace. We find solace, S-O-L-A-C-E, solace, comfort, support, encouragement. That's the word solace means. It's when the hopes we had, which have been dashed, which have been disappointed, of whatever kind that might be, that they're refigured, that they're kind of welcomed in and given a new frame, a new focus. Not that the hopes are given up, but they are refashioned. They are refashioned. So my prayer for you at home, or here in church, or wherever you are listening to this, maybe in sermon online later on, is that Christmas time of all times is when our hopes are met. Sometimes they have not been as they would have been, but they're accepted into the messiness and the very ordinariness of life. The shepherds, the manger, all the chaos of that first Christmas. And the earth in our very, very mundane lives. And they are given a new meaning and a new focus because God has come and been one of us. And I find that immensely, immensely encouraging and comforting at this time in our world's history. So may you have a blessed Christmas and a 2023 that will be however it will be. This is the third Christmas we've come round where we're hoping the next year is better than the last one. And who knows, because that hasn't actually worked out. But what we do know is that the God of Bethlehem is with us through whatever this year brings and offers us the solace of his comfort and the reconfiguring of our hopes.